breakfast? Yes. Well, listen, how many of you all have been to a large event like this in the last year and a half? Raise your hand. Okay, I'm super excited to be here. And not that I'm trying to break any rules, but I'm not going to wear the mask at least the time that I'm talking. So please, for those that don't like that, I ask for some forgiveness there. And for those that support me, thank you for that. So here we go. Good morning and welcome. I am extremely grateful we're here today after a year and a half of start, stop, pauses, redos, and do it again. I'm sure this resonates with all of you because we all had to make a lot of shifts, not only in our professional life, but also in our personal life. I want to thank everyone in this room, starting from our staff members. I know they're sitting somewhere around here. Hey guys, I want to say thank you to our students. Thank you. Yes. Thank you to our wonderful, wonderful, and amazing board that has provided amazing leadership and support, not only to me, to the organization, and to the staff as well, and to our great community partners that I'm seeing around here as well, and our great donors. So thank you, everyone who stuck with us in such a difficult time when there were a lot of other organizations that decided to take a different turn and shifted their priorities. So thank you, everybody that's here today. What a perfect name and place, the gathering spot for this event. This is our first time hosting this event, and if I'm inaccurate, because I started with Literacy Action last year, so I say what a perfect place to host this event, because this place celebrates collaboration, community, diversity, and entrepreneurial spirit, which are all of the core. I say all of the core, I want to be very specific about it, all of the core mission-related driving force things that Literacy Action believes in. We make progress every day towards our mission of helping underserved adults build better futures, and our vision of breaking the intergenerational cycle of low literacy and poverty. So we know that the gathering spot was the right place for us to host this event, especially, and I don't use the term that we're coming out of COVID. I know we are still there, maybe the tail end of it. But we are all in this together, and I know we are all doing a great job. So thank you all for being here. So, thank you. So, I don't have to say this is an elephant in the room anymore, because I know we've discussed COVID. You are probably sick and tired of hearing about this. But as many of you may know, this breakfast was pushed many times. If I can count on my fingers, at least 3 to 4 times. So. Somebody was pinching today and saying that thank God we are finally here today, so I feel very blessed and happy to have all of you here. But the name of this event initially was Obstacles to Equity Post-Pandemic. But we had to make adjustment because we clearly understand we're not quite there yet. Even though I am cautiously optimistic that we are through the worst of it. 19 months ago, when I came to Literacy Action as its new executive director, I met the staff, the students, and the volunteers virtually. I call it a very non-traditional way of starting a new job, and I think many of you that I met through Zoom or Teams, actually you all sympathize with me, and even my board, gave me a lot of grace. So. Maybe some of you can relate to this as well, if you have changed jobs during last year or this time. But I'm sure this is not, we all expected what was going to come our way in terms of this national or worldwide emergency or pandemic that we all have been. But I know it's time for us to sort of kind of move on from there. I do realize when I sit back and reflect that I didn't quite have the personal touch of starting a job on a first day of carrying a box of, pictures, a potted plant to my office. It was just a non-traditional way of sort of kind of, I call it, not very in tune or not very compassionate, where I was meeting with the staff members and the volunteers and the board through Zoom and Team. But that quickly became the way of life for majority of us. And I think we all have done a bang-up job because we've become overly productive. We've killed ourselves in the last year and a half. Raise your hand if you all feel that way. Okay, there you go. So starting with this, let's go back. Like I said, it was untraditional way for me to start. I wasn't able to slip into the back of the classroom to see how our teachers were teaching or inspiring our adult students, help them earn their GED, or those that were there so they could read to their grandkids. So again, a lot has changed in the last 1 year. We are back in the building. We opened our doors on October 4th. So I request each one of you, if you're ever in downtown, feel free to swing by and see the kind of operation we are running. We've shifted a lot of our service delivery model, but we're still very true to our mission. So I don't want to be too long on this podium because we have some wonderful speakers here, but you all have these notebooks in front of you. And I'm about to give you some very critical stats because I continue to say this to myself and to our teams every day. Why do we do the work that we do? Why am I here? Why are you here? I'm sure Literacy Action brings some kind of comfort or connection for you in your personal or professional life. That's why you're all here. So jot down some of these statistics if you would like, because this really resonates very strongly with me and a lot of our board members and our staff. 1 in 6 adults in Georgia have low literacy skills, defined as reading at a 5th grade level or below. 1 in 14 adults in Atlanta, over 25, do not have a high school degree. 1 in 3 unemployed adults lack the basic technical skills to apply for the 75% of available jobs. And I know we hear about the human capital deficit all the time. Our job is to make sure, how do we build that talent pipeline for the jobs that are coming? Because many jobs that were there before are not here anymore. There's a shift in the workforce. 60% of US adults are not able to do more than a 2-step numerical calculations. And more than half of the adults in US do not read above a 6th grade level. Did you all know about some of these statistics? These stats are especially relevant today given the events of the last 2 years. Low literacy adults are more likely to be hospitalized and less likely to participate in elections. This is another topic that I'm about to touch on, digital divide. I know this is not new. It has been around for a long time. However, we have seen a lot of disparity among people of color, specifically African American families. Now that we're operating in this world of digitization, we hear that Georgia specifically is quite low in terms of having the infrastructure in place to provide that support. According to National Digital Inclusion Alliance, Georgia ranks very low on the digital equity scorecard. And the disparity is sharpest among the people of color. 36% of African American homes do not have computer or broadband access. So, for the adults we worked with, there is no quick fix to eradicate these disparities or bridge the gap between talent and opportunity. Low literate adults are more likely to live in poverty, to be incarcerated, and to be dependent on government welfare programs, and to have children who read well below grade level. In turn, their children become low literate adults and are stuck in this vicious cycle of intergenerational cycle of poverty. That's where we come in play. Many of our students also face multiple barriers of independence and success and need that extra hand-holding or that motivation. This is where LAI steps in, Literacy Action. We offer tuition-free classes in adult basic education, ESL, which is English as a second language, digital literacy, family literacy, GED, and vocational training to help those people that are seeking for employment for sustainable jobs with livable wages. That's what we need. After knowing the statistics that you know now, the stories of some of the people you will meet today will truly amaze you. But rules are meant to be broken, and expectations are meant to be defied. Before I introduce you to a new board member and 3 of our students who have done just about that, let me conclude by saying how incredibly proud I am of all of our students and our entire staff these last 19 months. Despite the challenges of a public health crisis that required a pivot to a virtual and now to a hybrid model, last year we awarded over 1,000 program completion certificates, which has not happened before COVID. I cannot say this enough, but our staff has worked really hard. And there are a few more statistics I would like to share because I know that will make them really proud and get them excited. 97% of our students who've completed a class with LAI would recommend LAI programs to their friends and family. 96% said the class helped them perform better at work. That means that leads to job retention. 85% said the course enabled them to help their children and grandchildren with homework, which is very important. That is when we talk about this intergenerational cycle. So make no mistake, Literacy Action was knocked down, like many other organizations, but we were quickly inspired to get back up and get ourselves and our programs back on track. Well, without further ado, I would like to introduce you to a woman whose life story defies clearly every statistics that I just quoted to you. Her energy is quite contagious. Winifred Cox. Winifred is a managing director of Accenture's Interactive South Market unit, leading the health and service practice. She helps health organizations, state and local government educations, and not-for-profit organizations deliver on their aspirations to provide exceptional service and an optimal experience to all their stakeholders. She has over 24 years of diverse leadership, brand management, management consulting, creative agency, and digital transformation experience, and is experienced in several industries including health, public service, pharma, CPG, retail, quick service restaurants, telecom, entertainment, and financial services. Raised by grandparents with 1st and 6th grade literacy, Winifred is deeply committed to the mission of improving lives through improving literacy. Winifred, please, the stage is yours. Help me welcome Winifred, please. By the way, one more thing. Winifred is our hostess for the event as well.
All right, let's get this started. So I'm going to start by asking you a question. And when you answer the question, I want you to answer it in this way. If you're in agreement with me, I want you to say yes one time, because that's you telling yourself. And I want you to say yes a second time, and that's you confirming it with me. So when I ask you the question, I want you to say yes, yes. Are we excited to be here today to support an organization with the mission that Sandeep just described?
Yes. Yes.
All right, not only are they excited to be here, but they're good at following directions too. So thank you. First, I'd like to start by saying I've never been prouder to be a part of any organization as I am to be a part of this organization. And I can say that unequivocally. Say that 10 times really fast, right? I can say that without a shadow of a doubt, that I am proud to be associated with this organization. And let me tell you why. Sandeep mentioned it a little while ago, that I was raised by my grandparents in Pensacola, Florida. And if you know anything about Pensacola, Florida, back in the 70s and the 80s, it's not the sunshiny beaches of Destin that you see today. It was a whole different ballpark. You were either there vacationing or you were poor. Those were the two segments that were in Pensacola. My grandmother had a 6th grade education level and literacy level. My grandfather had a 1st grade education level. He was a sharecropper on the land that his grandfather was a slave on. And so when I recall what it was like to grow up into that household, it was never an absence of love. There was never an absence of passion. There was never an absence of the importance of education in my household. My grandmother had to stop in the 6th grade to take care of family. My grandfather had to stop in the 1st grade because he was required to work the land. That's what they did. But what I could see when I was growing up, this desire in my grandmother's face to be able to support, to be able to read a book. She asked me, said, "Baby, have you done your schoolwork today?" And I can see in her face the desire to want to help me and the inability to be able to help me. I could see the angst in her face when she had to take care of bills. And I'll tell you one other statistic, that she raised us on $232 a month. And the reason I know that number specifically is because I had to sit with my grandmother as early as 7 years old and help her plan out the bills to pay the electric company. I had to look up information for her. The only other money that was subsidized was my grandfather. I'll tell you a story about I was thinking fondly of this the other day as the leaves are starting to fall, and we live out in Chattahoochee Hills on 7 acres, so we're covered in pine straw and leaves. My grandfather would go and landscape people's yards and rake up that straw, bale it, and then go back and sell it to their neighbor. So it wasn't a lack of enterprise there by any means. But despite all of that, growing up in Pensacola where I lived, when you think about zip codes and the way that we define people's futures based on the zip codes that they grow up in, I was not supposed to be a graduate of the Wharton School. I was not supposed to be a managing director at Accenture. I was not supposed to be married for 29 years with 2 college-educated children behind me. None of those things were supposed to happen. And I want to share with you, Sandeep shared with you a few statistics. I want to share with you a few of my own. Atlanta, specifically, has the worst upward mobility rates of any metro in the country. Only 4% of the Metro Atlantans born into the bottom 20% of income ever make it to the top 20% of the income. So I say to you today, but by grace. But by grace. And now that we have organizations like Literacy Action, more families like mine can have grandmothers that can sit with their kids and help them read and be able to be involved and have the pride of being able to take care of their own bills and their own business and not have to ask their 7-year-old, their 8-year-old to support them with that. So thank you each for being here. I will also want to introduce you to our topic today. Sandeep talked about this a little bit, and the topic is around overcoming obstacles to economic equity. And each of our speakers today will share with you the role that they play in that and their own space within literacy. So first, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Kiana Good. Dr. Good serves as the Assistant Commissioner for Adult Education at the Technical College Systems of Georgia, TCSG. TCSG supports literacy action, and many of our students are referred to us by TCSG. A former teacher of both elementary and high school, Dr. Good leads the Office of Adult Education, which administers federal adult education grants and provides adult education training programs for approximately 50,000 Georgia residents. Additionally, she supports local adult literacy community groups throughout the state. Dr. Good I'd like for you to share with all of us here today some of the successes and failures that your students have experienced during this time, during this pandemic, and the additional adjustments that TCSG continue to make during this pandemic, which apparently seems to be ongoing.
Sure.
And what challenges have you seen specifically around retention during this pandemic? And what adjustments have you had to make there in order to keep the students?
Absolutely. Well, good morning. So our students are incredibly resilient, but our students were essential workers. So they never shut down. They never stopped working. I have a elementary age child and I have a high school age child. And when they were engaged in digital learning and I was working from home, it was really, really difficult for me to navigate. And I'm an educator. So our students had the exact same challenge. In many instances, if they were provided a laptop from their school district, that one laptop had to serve for 3, 4, 5 children. If they had toddlers, they were running after them. And it was incredibly difficult to balance all of that, navigate all of that, and then attend class. We were able to have a wonderful partnership with DeCal, and we actually applied and received a grant with the Aspen Foundation so that we can provide better supports to our student parents. And that's the overwhelming majority of the students who participate in our programs. We also had a great epiphany. So for many years, our focus has been sort of high school equivalency attainment. Like, we want you to get the GED. I think all of our eyes were opened at the statistic that we have, which is 6 months after exit, 12 months after exit from our programs. Our students, on average, their median earning is around $16,000 a year. So we have been essentially educating our students to still remain in poverty. And so there is a wonderful program, Integrated Education and Training, which provides a mechanism where our students are able to work towards the attainment of their high school equivalency while at the same time having that vocational, that technical training so that they exit with an industry-recognized credential so that they can have a job that provides benefits, they can have a job that gives them access to a different life trajectory. So in the pandemic, we really worried about our ability to continue to have this IET model, particularly in sort of this digital phase. I think a tremendous success is that we still were able to grant out well over 400 industry-recognized credentials during this time. I think a tremendous success is that we still were able to have a little shy of 6,000 high school equivalency credentials attained. I think a tremendous success is that we recognize that for every student who's able to be successful in a tested high school equivalency option, so GED or HiSET here in Georgia, we also needed to have a course-based option. So we were really proud of ourselves. We launched the course-based option in January of 2020. As you can imagine, that was disrupted mightily in March of 2020. That being said, we still were able to graduate students through our Career Plus, which is an innovative program that allows them to not only have courses, high school courses, but it's coupled with college courses. So those are tremendous successes that I think we've had in this incredibly challenging time. I think I've answered all of the question, but there were several parts, so I want to make sure I didn't miss anything.
I think you covered it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I just want to share with you how I like to shake it up a little bit. I just jump right into the program. But what I want to take a step back for a second, and I'd like to introduce you to our board chair at Literacy Action, Blake McDaniel, who works for the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta and is truly a phenomenal leader. When I was telling you earlier, I've never been prouder to serve, to be a part of any organization. I've never been prouder to serve alongside with such great leadership that is a part of the board of LAI. So with that, Blake, I'd like for you to Come up and say a couple of words, buddy.
Thanks, and I'll keep this brief so that we can get back to the main show. But I, like Winifred, am incredibly proud to serve on the board of LAI and am incredibly proud to be in the position of board chair. But I'm also incredibly fortunate. I'm incredibly fortunate to have such an amazing board. I'm incredibly fortunate to have an amazing executive director in Literacy Action, an amazing staff, and amazing students. But also, we're all incredibly fortunate to have the support of the community, and specifically supporting us here today as sponsors of this event. I want to in particular thank the Blank Foundation, Georgia Pacific, Georgia Power, Wells Fargo, PNC, GPC, Primerica, Junior League, Deloitte, Accenture, Literacy for All, Cushman Wakefield, Delta Community Credit Union, Cox, BMO, and Verizon. Without them, this event wouldn't have been possible. So they are the reason, or part of the reason, that we're here today, and they made all this possible. But also, I want to introduce one of our students and have her speak to her story and the impact that Literacy Action has made on her life. Pauline Hopgood is a student of Literacy Action. She's a mother of three young women who have all graduated high school. They all graduated high school, and two of them have gone to college. And they did so, and she enabled that because she didn't want them to feel the regret that she felt having not received her high school diploma. Well, she doesn't have to feel that regret anymore now that she's made significant progress with LAI. So with that, I'll invite her up to come tell her story and give a little bit more information about herself and her journey. So please, Pauline. And I didn't mention this in my introduction, but Pauline is just coming off her shift. She's doing all this while working an incredibly grueling schedule at a hospital. So.
Good morning, everybody. Like I said, I'm just coming from work. I do overnight at the hospital, and I've been in Atlanta for 2 years. So when I first came here, like I was telling Ms. Dawn, that in New York, born and raised, that's all I know, raised my kids. I was a big fish in New York. Here I'm a little fish in a big pond. Looking for work here made it very difficult. So the work that I do is EVS. I clean the rooms, clean areas, but I knew there was something else that I wanted to do because I can't keep doing this with the COVID and everything that went on. Anyway, I was asked to come here to talk about Literacy Action. And I was so grateful that they asked me to come, because one thing about Literacy Action, it was the best thing that I did. When I took that leap, I'm 55 years old, and I feel like a little girl back in school, learning, and every time I learn something, I get more excited, I get more motivated. I have, how can I say, a little girl in a candy store. I want to learn everything that they have to give me. It's changed my life because I have a 35-year-old and a 30 and a 34-year-old. And looking at them and not understanding what they wanted me to show them was very hard for me. I don't know, it hurt. I lost my dreams. Somewhere in my life, I lost the goal that I wanted to go and continue and educate myself. But I had to raise my kids. So when I got to Literacy Action, it was like, I was scared, but I'm here for the challenge. I'm gonna do this because I want this for me. I want this for me to show my kids that I can't give up because I have them. I want to show them something better. I love the school. When I got there, my reading was horrible. My math was, but I am proud to say that I can read better. I understand the math. The teachers take time and they show me. Even when it's time that I can't get it, I get frustrated. I'm like, can I really do this? But they put it in me. We have classes from 9 o'clock in the morning to 12 o'clock, from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock. And I look forward to that. I look forward to going to school and actually learning something that I want. Being more motivated. I'm not afraid to, when someone tells me to read something, I would turn around and act like, they're not talking to me. But I can do it now. With their help and what they showed me so far, I'm so happy. I love Literacy Action because the teachers motivate me. We have Aztec, and Aztec, it's step by step by step by step. And when I don't understand it, I go back and I look at it. It might look crazy, but I'm getting it. And I'm gonna do this because I want this. I wanna be able to tell my kids, I did this, my grandkids. I have an 18-year-old grandson, and he's the one that helps me with algebra now. Yeah, and he tells me, Grandma, you can do this, Grandma. Look at me. That's my teacher. Like I said, I'm so glad that they invited me to come here because people don't understand. It's just the jump. You want to do this, but you're afraid. You're afraid how people are going to look at you. You're afraid of what they're going to say. You're afraid of what they're going to say behind your back. But I prayed on it and I said, God, I'm going to do this. And I took that leap of faith and I'm here. So thank you. I thank you very much from the bottom of my heart that I joined this program and it's doing so much for me. And I pray that people look at this and take that leap of faith like I did, because it'll be the best thing in the world for them, like if it was for me.
I have another question for you. Did that story, what Pauline just shared with us, did that touch you at the deepest part of your heart? Let me hear you. Yes. Yes. Pauline, thank you for your bravery in taking on that challenge for your family and for yourself. Thank you for your bravery of sharing your story with us today. I'm hoping that story moves each of you to go to the website so that we can fund another program so that we have many Pauline stories. I'm going to introduce you to our next speaker for today, Mr. John Stevenson. Mr. John Stevenson serves as the executive director of the J. Bulla Campbell Foundation. The Campbell Foundation was established in 1940 through the estate of J. Bulla Campbell, an Atlanta businessman, civic leader, and philanthropist. Since its inception, the foundation has awarded over $800 million in grants. John has been in this role since 1985. And prior to his role with the Campbell Foundation, he was with Emory University, 7 years as the Vice President of Development, 5 years as the Secretary of Emory University. Now, John, can you share with us, as someone who's been in the foundation sphere for close to 4 decades, what do you and your peers in the Atlanta giving community see as the trends in giving going forward to make sure we're moving obstacles to equity for communities most acutely impacted by this public health emergency? If you could share your thoughts on that.
Well, good morning, and I'm pleased to be invited to this panel. I think it's entirely unfair to ask the panelists to follow that testimony, by the way. It'll be hard to match that. The Campbell Foundation, first I'd like to start by saying that if I'm representing private philanthropy in Atlanta, which is a very generous community, following a very generous Southern tradition of individual, corporate, and civic generosity, I would caution all of us to not generalize about private foundations, community foundations, that they are all so different in their approach. There are some generalizations, but I'm speaking really from the perspective of a relatively large, by Atlanta and Georgia standards, relatively large foundation that focuses on capital grant making to build buildings and renovate buildings and acquire property for agencies and organizations that are trying to make our community better. In doing that, we are privileged to award grants. Almost our largest category of grant making is in the field of education. Our next largest category is in the field of human services and youth serving organizations. There's a lot of overlap, and it gives us the opportunity to deal with underserved communities, low-performing schools, children at risk, families at risk. It's a large part of what we do. By the way, I'm running for president of the Maria fan club. Some of our work is in relation to the Atlanta public school system by way of helping address underserved schools or low-performing schools. And Maria has provided tremendous leadership in this area with innovation and design that is really making a difference. So just let me say that. In terms of obstacles, of course, the defensive part of me would like to say we don't feel like there are obstacles, systemic or otherwise, in approaching the Campbell Foundation or the family foundations that we represent. But having said that, perception is reality. And I think what I'd like to suggest is that this is the case with most foundations in the South. There are some exceptions, but generally speaking, the Woodruff Foundations, Tull, Campbell, these larger capital grant-making foundations are led by a small professional staff and relatively small boards of directors or trustees. That translates into a heavy reliance on the nonprofit sector itself to self-identify to the philanthropic sources what the opportunities are. So we don't have a program specialist in education. We don't have a program specialist in the environment or medicine or any of the major categories you might identify. That means that we stand ready to hear from the sector itself and the individual agencies and organizations to identify grant opportunities. Okay, well, how does that work? It means that the larger, established, ongoing, financially sustainable agencies and organizations are very adept at coming before us, giving us grant opportunities. The reality is that smaller, emerging, grassroots, neighborhood-type organizations are rightly preoccupied with serving their constituency, and they don't have the level of experience or allocation of resources to do the kind of fundraising that brings them into our offices. So there's sort of a de facto disconnect, if you will, or lack of opportunity. Maybe it's called an obstacle. So how do we address that? I would say, you know, in the case of the Campbell Foundation, we're directed by Mr. Campbell's will. We have instructions. We have policies and procedures that lead us to where we are and where we've been for 80 years. I will say that given the summer of 2020, the combination of the heightened awareness on social justice and the heightened awareness brought on by the pandemic, we've done some self-examination. And this is where you say, well, fine, show me the money. But we have looked at our way of doing things. We've looked at our organization, which may or may not change over time. We've had 11 employees in 81 years, and 7 of them are currently employed. So it's not like we have a lot of turnover at the Campbell Foundation. But with COVID, for instance, normally we would make 40 grants a year, about 10 or 12 per quarter, adding up to $25 or $30 million. Relatively selective, large grants toward capital campaigns. From April 2020 to April 2021, with the help of the nonprofit sector, we awarded 92 grants to 92 organizations, a third of whom we'd never given money to before. So we are capable of putting our playbook aside. And I'm really proud of the fact that we were able to do that. But it also revealed to us that we can do a better job of saying who we are. We've redesigned our website, for instance. Website, please. The young people on my staff redesigned the website, let's put it that way, so that we're trying to be increasingly transparent. We always have felt like we're accessible. We're a telephone call away, a visit in our office. And I realize that not all foundations are that way. I can't speak for them. But in this environment, I will just commit to you that we are open to suggestion, and we are open to providing advice, even if it doesn't lead to a grant for a building or something like that. We welcome suggestions, and we want to do our part in reducing the barriers, real or perceived, in philanthropic Atlanta. Let me stop there and be ready for questions. Does that get to the question at hand?
Absolutely. And I think you did a wonderful job of just sharing really understanding how grant giving is done, and the importance of it, and the areas of where you're focused, and the areas around education, and that specific area of focus for you all is extremely relevant to what we do at LAI and what we're trying to accomplish for these communities. Because I'll share with you, based on something that you said, John, another statistics, that why this is so important and why working with the Atlanta public school systems and other education organizations is so important, that children from low literate homes who are not read to regularly, if at all, hear an average of 5,000 to 50,000 words before age 5. Children who are read to daily hear an average of 170,000 to 1.5 million words before entering kindergarten. So think about that child that's in a household or in a situation where they're not surrounded by that level of academia, that level of reading and engagement versus those that are each day. So it's incredibly important, the work that the Campbell Foundation is doing, the work that LAI is doing, and the work that each of you are doing to support these organizations. So thank you, John. I think as we move on, and we hear from Stuart Anderson, I'd like to share with you one other statistic. 13%, or approximately 1.4 million adults in Georgia, 25 and up, do not have a high school degree. 13% of the adults in Georgia also live below the poverty line. The intergenerational cycle of poverty and low literacy is devastating. And I will tell you, while I was able to be the exception for that, not all in my family were. So the work continues to be important. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to Stuart Anderson. He's the Assistant Vice President and Director of the Center for Workforce and Economic Opportunity at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. Stuart conducts research and works across the country to support Federal Reserve and partner organizations, their efforts in workforce development, the labor market, and economic opportunities for low to moderate income workers. And given that statistic that I just shared about the number of folks working below, that living below the poverty line, Stuart, I'd like to hear from you a couple of things. What does unemployment look like currently? Secondly, what I'd like to understand, what are the necessary skills for students, particularly students like LAI students, that are necessary for hiring and recruiting? And one final thing I'd like for you to address is, during this uncertain time, what role can LAI specifically play during the recovery period?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Both unemployment and employment situation today are a little bit puzzling. Things feel like they've recovered really quite well. We no longer have 14 or 15% unemployment like we did 18 months ago. That being said, we know that there are still millions of people across the country not working today that work. If we just look at the total number of people that were working in February of 2020, there are millions of people less working. And that's because a lot of people have left the labor market. They're no longer counted in that statistic. Now, to say that it's all driven by the pandemic isn't necessarily correct. We knew that a lot of retirements were coming. Some of you all have heard me talk before, and you've heard about demographic changes that were coming. Well, a public health crisis that particularly affects older workers has led many of them to leave the labor market. But it's also meant, we heard about caregiving for both young and old and family members, that has led women, particularly with caregiving responsibilities, to have to leave the labor market. They're not working. The pandemic also, we all remember when you got dressed up like this to get on Zoom? We're a lot more used to using digital communication and digital skills now. We've all been talking about the future of work changing. That's sped things up a little bit too. We've adopted new ways of working. All of a sudden, our thought of going to the office 2 or 3 days a week feels like going back 60 or 70 hours a week. We're in a different world. We also knew that there were going to be fewer traditional students and workers. The children of the Great Recession, 2008, are coming of age. But in the Great Recession, a lot of people of parents' age decided not to have children. There's 15% less children coming of age in 2025 when those children of the Great Recession turn 18. So that means that our traditional students, the places that employers traditionally look for their core workforce, there's going to be less of them. Colleges are concerned about what it means for enrollments, and it's going to mean that there's a smaller workforce, which means something that we have to look to talent pools that we haven't looked at before. We have to look to women who have not been engaged or fully engaged in the workforce. We have to look to people of color who still, and women and people of color, deal with unemployment and disruptions from the pandemic in ways that the general population do not, still disproportionately affecting them. And it means that we have to integrate and pull in people that we have often overlooked. Not just into the first jobs, but into gateway jobs that move people into targets and careers. Now that means that we have to also think about skills. When the future of work changes and we were all getting dressed up for Zoom and we weren't exactly sure what to do and there were more cats in the background, digital skills are critical. Jobs at Walmart, at Amazon, at places that we think of as accessible first jobs, you might have to have digital skills just to apply. You're not going to get that job. Even the people driving and delivering have to interface with mobile technology. Digital skills, literacy skills that Literacy Action teaches are table stakes. Then you're probably going to need something that's a specific skill, whether it's in healthcare or in an IT field. These are things that I'm sure you'll hear more of, and many of you know better, that those are critical skills and in demand in Atlanta. So what Literacy Action does is it helps prepare people to get onto those career pathways and get into a place where people can progress through their careers. It starts with the things that we've already heard about today. It then needs to move into what many of you all do and is into a specific training. And for the employers and the people that are in HR in the room, you need to think about ways to partner with organizations to tell them what you need to help it get integrated into the adult education programs that are taught, so that you can have and find people that you may not be able to find easily in the way that you once did.
Thank you so much, Stuart, for those remarks. I'm going to introduce you to our next speaker, Brett Lacey. Brett is the Workforce Division Manager for Select Fulton, leading the Workforce Fulton team in developing regional partnerships among key industries and providing investments to address the workforce development needs of Fulton County. And Brett, Stuart mentioned work changing. So it'd be awesome if you can talk about what industries, jobs in Georgia that were most affected by the pandemic. Which ones do you see, or you're worried about recovering? And Stuart alluded to some of those. And where are you most optimistic? So give us your thoughts on how you see the work landscape changing.
Yeah, well, I think Stuart used a really good way to describe what workforce looks like right now, and it's a puzzle. I think if you zoom back and look as a whole, and you think of the whole economy, and specifically you just look at the 10-county metro region, it mostly looks like the puzzle's complete, where we look like we're back to where we were 20 months ago. But the closer you start to look, you're missing a few edge pieces, you're missing a few of the trees in the landscape. You don't quite have what was on the box. And I think that's what's really fascinating, is as you dig down, you can see the more and more you start to look, the more you start to notice where things are different, both good and bad. Let's be sure to highlight the positive, because we really are seeing the growth in some of these industries that the pandemic has really highlighted. Your IT, your healthcare, your logistics. The only reason we're not back to full employment there is what Stuart was talking about, is we just don't have the workers. The labor force is smaller now than it was 20 months ago. And as we start to see people, whether it's childcare, whether it's hesitancy over the safety of the workforce, as those pieces start to fall into place, you'll see people start to come back into those. So those are the positives. On the other side of the spectrum, though, is really where we as a workforce system have really got to pay attention. Your hospitality and your service industries, retail, at least storefront retail, have really been decimated. And I'm not really optimistic, I think, that those are going to come back anytime soon. And why that's a challenge is that when we dig down into who that workforce is, it's exactly those individuals that are going to have the hardest time getting back. It's our older workforce. It is our women who typically have that child care role in the home that have to get back into the workforce. in particular our workforce of color that is having the challenges to get back into this. And as working in Fulton County, there's one extra layer to that too, the challenge of geography. When we talk about, again, these industries that have recovered, IT, healthcare, those are north of the city. There are not a lot of healthcare IT jobs south of I-20. There are not a lot of, if we have students that are looking to enter those fields, we don't have schools south of 20 for them to even get into those fields. And so that's one of the challenges that we have as workforce, and how workforce has changed is finding solutions to get our workforce transportation. MARTA doesn't extend down to Chattahoochee Hills, down into Union City, down into, it gets into East Point, but how do we get our workforce that are eager and willing to learn, how do we get them into that? So that's one of the challenges that we have of really getting there, but we're building partnerships. I am optimistic that we are finding solutions as we come together as a region to try to solve this problem. And so that's some of the workforce. Again, the digital literacy, I think we've talked about, comes into play. But I'll tell you one other area that I am, what's starting to keep me up at night is, you saw this week the president signed this bipartisan infrastructure bill. It's huge for the country. It's huge for the state of Georgia. Until you start to think about who's going to be responsible for building those bridges and building those roads and putting in the broadband so that we can have more access to digital skills and even our communities in the metro area that don't have reliable internet. And you've got to start having a workforce to do all of this. You've got to have basic literacy skills. You've got to have basic math skills for us to produce a workforce that is already a very tight labor market and already has a shortage of workers. And we've been talking for 10 years about older workers retiring and leaving the workforce, and it's nowhere more acute than it has been in skilled trades. And now we have to make up that gap in addition to what we're going to be facing in the next few years. So I think that's another challenge that we don't talk about that is going to be facing the industries for the metro region, but it's another opportunity for us to get in on the front end and make sure that we're equipped to help our students get there.
Thank you so much for those thoughts. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Bentina Terry. Bentina is the Senior Vice President for Regional External Affairs and Community Involvement for Georgia Power. She's also responsible for leading the social justice efforts on behalf of Southern's company Moving to Equity initiative. Bettina, if you can share with us your thoughts on Georgia Power specifically, along with the Georgia Power Foundation. They've committed to invest $87 million throughout 2021 to 2025 to continue advancing racial equity and social justice efforts in Georgia. How does this funding impact underserved communities specifically? And then secondly, I want you to talk about the company's investment that are part of the overall commitment by Southern Company and its charitable foundations, and that's to invest a combined $225 million over 5 years to support these efforts. How does the company's overall financial investment impact racial equity? Because many of what we've heard, everyone, that people of color, specifically African Americans, are disproportionately impacted by these challenges.
Good morning, and thank you for having me here today. I would be remiss if I didn't also thank Brian Green, who's our Southern Company. He just left Georgia Power to go to a new job, y'all. So he's at Southern Company Gas, but he's our member on the LAI board, so we appreciate that, Brian. Thank you. So when I was researching what to say today, I found a quote by Fred. I didn't find it. The person who helped me put this together, which is Lee, who's sitting at the table. I say I, it's like the royal I, or we is the royal we, so most of the time it actually means Lee, who helps me a whole lot. So Lee, raise your hand now that I've called you out. She's really embarrassed. But she found a quote, which I really love, that said, "Once you learn to read, you'll forever be free." And that's a quote by Frederick Douglass. And if you really think about the context of that quote, the reality, the truth on its face is, yeah, once you learn to read, you have access to so much, and it makes your life so much better. But the reality is, if you think about the context, for Frederick Douglass to say that, it was in a time where it was illegal to teach African Americans or slaves to read. right? And so literacy has been used as a tool, or illiteracy, whichever way you think about it, in order to oppress people. So literacy is all about equity. If you go to even our modern days, of course, in many countries that have different views about women and their equality, in those countries, those women can't go to school, either because resources aren't provided to allow them to go to school to deal with issues, or they are prohibited or forbidden to go to school. And so when you think about, when we do at Southern Company, we think about literacy in that equity context. The company has done a lot over the years. Many of you know we always say, it's our tagline, we're a citizen wherever we serve. So we've always been involved and engaged in our communities, but we've not done that through the lens of equity. And what we decided to do, like many corporations in the wake of what happened in 2020, was to stop and take a look at what we were doing and ask ourselves, is what we're doing really impacting on this equity space? And so across Southern Company, we actually assembled 5 teams, 5 different work streams. There was talent, or is talent and culture. Those are 2 of them: community, political engagement, and supplier diversity. Of course, the first 2 are focused internally, the last 3 are focused externally. And we got together groups of employees to really talk about what we should do in these areas. And I was asked to lead what we call the community space of that. And that had to do with what we were going to do around our social justice giving. And I have a partner who is engaged on the community engagement or community investment pillar. And we work really, really closely together. And so we worked with a group of employees to come up with this goal of $225 million over the next 5 years to invest in 5 different areas to try to move the needle on social justice. Now, we certainly understand that we can't do that alone, right? That's our piece of what we feel like we can give, and Georgia Power's piece of that is $87 million. But what it really is about is we've always given away money. We've always been engaged in our communities. But again, if you apply an equity lens to that, how does that change what we give? Now, I tell people all the time, that doesn't mean we're not going to give to things that aren't social justice or equity related, because those things are important too. But when you look at what we're doing around giving, the larger percentage of what we're doing now is focused on social justice and equity. We've got 4 different focus areas in that area, and they all really relate back to literacy. And I'll be honest with you, until the research was done to think about this speech and what I was going to say today, I didn't completely understand that nexus between what we were talking about, what we wanted to do, and social justice and equity and literacy. And so I'm going to give you some more statistics. This is obviously a great time for stats. But of our 4 pillars, one of them is educational equity. And it is exactly what it sounds like. It's like, how can we ensure that our educational system works in a way to both promote equity as well as have equity within that system? So when I stopped and did some research, of course, I found out that children of adults with low literacy skills are 72% more likely to be at a low reading level in school. That 2 out of every 10 kids that enter kindergarten with skills 2 or more grade levels below where they need to be, and you can add an additional child who is 1 grade level below. And for those kids, in a year, they can't make up 2 or 3. They might be able to make up 1, but they can't make up 2 or 3. Illiteracy is a major factor for when our adolescents graduate from high school, and ethnicity is a key factor in that. About 52% of Black 4th grade children and 45% of Hispanic 4th graders score below basic reading levels compared to 23% of white kids. So when you look at those in context and our work around educational equity, there's some really important work that's being done by Jamal Jesse, who's here today, as well as Joseph Lilybad, who run our education group in our Community and Economic Development Department, trying to identify school clusters across this state where we think we can move the needle, where we can see that they are historically disadvantaged communities with historically low scores, and we're asking ourselves, what would the investment take to move the needle? So we've identified 4 clusters across the state, and we'll be making investments into those clusters to see what impact can Georgia Power really have, and how can we be a model for other foundations and corporations that want to figure out how you move the needle on educational equity. Really proud of that work. So far this year, we've invested about $7 million in educational equity at Georgia Power alone. And that was at the end of the third quarter. So we know that at the end of this year, we'll actually exceed our targets for that. And we do have, I'll take a step back, specific targets that are reviewed, all of our moving to equity work, reviewed by our management council, that's our highest level of executives at Southern Company, and by the Southern Company Board of Directors and our individual board of directors. And we also have auditors involved to audit our results to make sure that what we say we've done actually is what we're doing. One of the other areas that we're focused on is criminal justice equity. And that one, of course, some 2/3 of students who lack proficient reading skills by the end of 4th grade end up in jail or on welfare. 85% of the youth that are involved in the juvenile court system are functionally illiterate, and 70% of those people in U.S. prisons don't read above a 4th grade level. We gave this year about $5 million so far at the end of the third quarter to help with criminal justice equity. Focused primarily on how we keep kids from entering the system. So that's everything from the At Promise Youth Centers here in Atlanta to giving money around expungement. So how do we help those folks that enter the system come out of the system and be able to work? And we've given lots of money to organizations that are really focused on that whole experience. So not just how do you do the expungement, but how do you work on literacy and workforce development skills so those people can enter the workforce. And at Southern Company, we have a no felon rule. It was really interesting when I started doing this work. The first thing I said was, I can't speak at any credibility about criminal justice equity as long as we at Southern Company say we're not going to hire felons. I wish I could say that we move fast. We don't. It has to go to the general counsel and the risk management group, but we're going through a process now. But there is a goal towards removing that particular prohibition, because what we understand is that felonies shouldn't be something that keep you from getting a good job. And there are lots of people out there that need the opportunity. And our third pillar is economic empowerment. And that's really focused on entrepreneurship and affordable housing and investing in small businesses. We know that people struggling with literacy are more likely to be poor, to lack education, and to miss out on opportunities to participate fully in society. And one thing that just struck me is that those with the lowest literacy scores are 16.5 times more likely to receive public financial aid in the past year relative to those in the highest literacy group. They're also more likely to have to be in that lowest measured wage group, working full time, but earning less than $300 per week. So this year, we've given about $5 million in an effort on economic empowerment, really focused on how we can help small businesses and entrepreneurs, how we can help people with affordable housing, and how we can help in neighborhoods like the west side of Atlanta through giving to the Grove Park Foundation. So our last area is energy equity, and when you think about energy equity, probably the closest literacy category to that is financial literacy. And quite honestly, the banks do such an awesome job in the financial literacy category that we've decided that that's not where we'll make our investment. Instead, we'll make our investment in how we make the products and services that we provide at Georgia Power, whether or not that's solar power or whether or not that's electric vehicle charging stations, available to all of the people who live in Atlanta, just not the more wealthy people who live in Atlanta. So we're working on that. So I'll close I was looking back up and there was a quote by Barack Obama, and this, actually I did find this one so I can take credit for this. It's not often, right, because Lee does such a good job. But it said that literacy is the currency for our knowledge economy. And we all really know that without the ability to be able to read and to be able to therefore then participate fully in our economy, it's really hard for you to be productive. Our economy and the health of our economy is directly tied to the literacy of our citizens. And so at Georgia Power and Southern Company, we really believe that whatever we can do to invest and make an impact, we're going to try to do. And it's really great, honestly, to work for a company that believes in that and to be able to do this work. But I know that many of you in this room work every day tirelessly to make that same impact, and we're just glad to be partners with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Bentina. That is corporate citizenship in action. So thank you for that. And I think when you talked about your first pillar, really looking for those 4 clusters of low-performing schools is a perfect segue to our next speaker, Dr. Maria Karstoffen. Dr. Karstoffen is the former superintendent of Atlantic Public Schools, where she led the district's 52,000 plus students, 6,000 full-time employees, 87 schools, while overseeing an annual $1 billion budget. She's also not only served in Atlanta, she served in Austin, she served in St. Paul, Minnesota, so she's familiar with school systems. Maria, a couple of things I'd like for you to chat about is that a lot of foundation and government money is funneled towards youth education programs, but given the high probability that low literate adults will also have kids who read below grade level, we believe that there's an imperative to offer programs that help undereducated adults with learning gaps so that they can feel more confident reading to children and grandchildren and helping them with their homework. And I know that firsthand, and so I'd love to hear your perspective on that. Secondly, I would love to hear your perspective on the family literacy effort that we have at LAI. You work with us on that effort, and I'd like for you, if you can, explain a little bit more about why that interests you, why you believe it's important to get the whole family on board when we talk about literacy education.
Great, thank you so much for having me today. First, I just want to acknowledge that I know we're running tight on time, so I'm going to push pretty fast and cut through some of the things that were already said. But the name of this event is actually Overcoming Obstacles to Economic Equity. And depending on how you define equity, and just so that everybody's clear where I stand, it is for those who need more, they get more, in order to make education an equalizing field for people to be able to transform their lives. Now, I'll just cut to the chase. I believe that you overcome obstacles to economic equity by stopping the, I think, very aggressive efforts to ensure that people make money off of poverty. There are so many efforts to actually capitalize on poor people that you end up with less resources to invest in them in the first place. And I will tell you, the one comment that was made today that touched me the most was by Pauline. I don't think, is she still here? God bless you. She said, I lost my dreams. And that was tied to her opportunity to have access to a quality education. And since it was already, used before, not this particular quote, but I just want to say, Bentina, I'm going to also reference a similar quote. But the idea that equal rights and equal means to maintain them was at the cornerstone of what Frederick Douglass was talking about in the late 1800s. Yes, it was tied to slavery, but it was also tied to education. And the behavior of the systems around what we've been doing in education as far back as his time hasn't been changed dramatically. You don't overcome an obstacle like this by not actually calling out the very systems that keep people trapped in intergenerational poverty. And part of my assignment today was to kind of look back at the previous speakers and unpack it a little bit so that we could have some trends or maybe walk away with some thoughts as we go back to our various places in life and leadership in Atlanta. And I see it in a couple of categories. There's the category of managerial leadership. Y'all were talking about it specifically from the perspective of the Federal Reserve Bank and the Fulton County workforce. But the idea that you're actually developing leaders and people in the pipeline for work that are getting access to the beyond the old systems of education, and not just job training, but career pathway access. And one example is rethinking what we're offering to adults in particular who are there to stabilize their family. I think the managerial or leadership component of this has been spoken to multiple times by this panel. And if the very leaders in this room who are responsible for creating these positions or creating bridges for people to have access to these positions, it becomes imperative that the managers, the leaders of these institutions actually change the way they are reaching down to help people who don't have those skills. Another category that I think everything kind of started falling into was the concept of educational or academic leadership in the field, meaning you can't just keep offering the same things. You have to actually change the curriculum. If you're in higher ed or if you're working in that space, that is one of the most important pieces to the work that we've talked about today. Making sure that, yes, someone graduates from high school on time or gets that GED or whatever it takes for them to make it out of the space, but moving from a job mindset to a career mindset gets people more motivated to stay in the workforce. What I hear from even younger people as we're transitioning out of COVID is that, they don't want to work in something that doesn't inspire them. They're actually looking for a purpose because life seems more fragile today. And so if we're not thinking about the upcoming worker as well as maintaining some or creating some of the new structures or breaking down a lot of the challenges in there, whether it's racism or investing in some of the designs that works against poor people. I know someone used a statistic about prison, I think it was you, Bentina, about the age of kids. I mean, the thing that just makes it so hard for me to understand, I'm from the Deep South, I'm from Selma, Alabama, so we're all talking to the same people here. So I'm not judging, we're all family. But we spend more investing in prisons and building prisons from a private perspective than we do actually thinking about what we could be doing for children and their families so they get above that 4th grade reading level. And that's just another example of how we just, from a literacy perspective, just really hogtie our families from being able to make these transitions. I'm also going to throw in political, like the political mindset. There are a lot of people on this stage that I have seen fighting, especially John, thank you for your comments, but, changing the designs of the system, working to take effective action to change the outcome, which is different to just doing something. Like you're challenging the status quo. You're telling people that enough is enough. And that part of the political leadership that people in this room could exercise would be mobilizing for people who don't have a voice or access to the roles and the opportunities that you have. And I think it's social emotional in its foundation. I always would tell teachers, if you don't like children, don't teach. I mean, this is like, you would think this is a basic concept, but that's not what people do. But it's also something like you have to take into your heart. You actually have to care about the experience of other people. And that's what led me to, once you get beyond like the basic, paradigm for kind of analyzing what people have said. Are you willing to get the leaders and people in the pipeline to manage better with this future mindset? Are you willing to put in the academic and educational systems that address the needs of the very people we're trying to help? Are you also willing to take the political action to, challenge the status quo, even if it makes people uncomfortable or puts you in the hot seat? And finally, having the social emotional intelligence to care enough about them so that you treat them the way you treat your own family or you hope for your own children and young people in your life. Now that leads me to the next question around why I care about literacy action, why I have a massive crush on Addison Merriweather, who is really the cheerleader, the guy cheerleader. And as you know from high school, there are very few of them, right? So, but he was like that cheerleader who was getting into our Leadership Atlanta class. Many of them are here today at the back table. Wave your hands, clap. I'm glad that you're here because he was the one that kept explaining and sharing. But I also think, maybe he won't say it because he's really a sweet, nice person, but I'll say it. I don't think people care enough about this particular issue and the question around what can federal, state, and local agencies do. Fund it. Fund it. Fund the work that Dr. Good is doing as well. I mean, you actually have to put the resources in the caregiver as well. And I'll close out, as I was transitioning out of the superintendency, I teamed up with a great group of people, and we did a very deep analysis, and Brett, I should send it to you, about what's actually happening in the south side of the city. Everybody knows that's where the lack of opportunity is, it's a lack of investment, and so on and so forth. But what we did find was that whether it was self-reported or people calling into the 311 system for the metro area, or if they were reporting information to their principals and other leaders in their lives, they, of course, were concerned about just making ends meet, covering utilities and rent and things of that sort. But as we started going down the list, adult literacy was one of them. And it is because parents really do want to be involved in their child's life, but also have the skills necessary to be able to communicate with them today. And it is very hard to do that if your literacy skills are low, if you can't do basic math, and it's hard for you to communicate. And so what the data was showing, and thank you anybody who's with the Boston Consulting Group in this room, and they volunteered a ton of their time to analyze this with us, is that the stabilization of the caregiver, making sure that they are earning more than that $15,000 a year, getting them not into a livable wage, right? That is a goal, but you have to be in a wage that allows you to stabilize your family and then make the investments in things that the rest of us do in this room to be able to be involved as a relevant, resident and citizen in your community. So that is beyond the livable wage. And it doesn't take much, but once you stabilize the caregiver, the multiplier effect to everyone in that household is like eightfold. And so the reason I keep coming back, the reason I help raise money to support the program and direct other funders and people who care but might not have done anything given where we were in COVID and the general move today to invest in younger children and youth, we drove people back to this kind of program because the caregiver, if you want to eliminate an achievement gap in schools, right, making sure they don't come to us 2 and 3 years grade levels below where, into the kindergarten programs, it means that you have to invest in that family. It's the caregiver, the multiplier effect in that family when you help them with the education and they get the stabilizing economic power of at least a livable wage, but a little better and connected to a career, not just any job, because that's what Pauline talked about, right? You were like, I don't want to clean floors and bathrooms for the rest of my life. I actually want more. I want that dream. And if you live in America and if you believe in the amazing people and leaders like Frederick Douglass back in the 1800s, it is time for us to really give people freedom of life, opportunity, education, and ultimately, I'll close by saying, I think there should be another right added to this list, and it's the right to connectivity. It is as important as water was in the 1970s. It's as important as people not having to live in slavery in the 1880s. It is a right for every person on this planet, because the digital divide is going to be the rate of change in technology is going to be the thing that separates the haves and the have-nots in the future. So getting our arms around that and ensuring that not just the adults, but the children have access to that is what will change our world. Thank you so much.
I would like to start by saying yes to everything that you said, Dr. Christoffen. I'd like to, and I know we're at time, so thank you all for hanging in there with us. But all of the information that's being shared is so incredibly important for each of us to take in and then share out when we go out into our communities. Now I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Christoffen's crush, Addison Mayweather. He's a former board chair and the executive director at Cushman Wakefield, and is the first person that I talked to about being a part of this organization, and for that will ever be a dear friend of me.
So I get to follow Dr. C, who made me blush, but it's not the first time. No, it's great to be here this morning and to bring this program to a conclusion. And I know we're a little over time, so bear with us while we do a couple of things. But first, I do want to thank Winifred for doing an outstanding job. And I also want to thank everybody on this stage to give their perspective and all their information and their data. And I'll quote a few more of you when I say a few closing remarks. But let's give a round of applause for them. So we do have a treat, and we do want to recognize two more students, one of which the preference was a recording, a video, but unfortunately technology, as every meeting these days, technology screws something up, so we were unable to do that. But I want to recognize Lena Marr. Lena, if you're here, raise your hand. Let's celebrate Lena. And then I want to invite Milton Creamer to come to the podium, who's going to say a few remarks. Milton? As he's walking up, I just want to say a few remarks from Milton. Milton is a father of two daughters and a proud grandfather. In 1974, he left school, dropped out to start working as many did in that era and are doing today. But he has come back full circle and is in Literacy Action today, getting his GED. And Milton, we thank you for trusting us as an organization to help you reach your dream. If you would just share a few remarks.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. As you know, my name is Milton Creamer, and I'm grateful to be a part of Literacy Action. And by the way, they bought me these glasses as well, which I needed them, because I can barely see. Thank you for the introduction. And like you said, I am, haven't been in school since 1974. And my youngest daughter, she's 4 months pregnant, right? This is her very first child. She was legally married about a year ago, and she's a former airline stewardess, for American Airlines. And she quit on the stress-related issues during the pandemic, and all these type of things. And even though, I've had a lot of struggles in my life, and made a lot of bad decisions, but choosing to become a part of Literacy Action was not one of them. That was one of the best decisions I've made in my life. It's just like making an apology to myself for all the bad decisions that I've made in my life, and for that I am truly grateful. Even as one of the panel was saying about the learning to read, once you learn to read, you're forever free, by Frederick Douglass, and that is that. But now in Literacy Action, they teach us more about reading comprehension and writing, we can read something, but do you understand what you read? You know, those type of things. And it was just so hard for me to do that. Even when, like Ms. Dunn, she's one of our leader of the RLA classes, you know, talks about help us to learn to use correct grammar. And I didn't know it was just so much to it. I'm just saying, we just taught this grammar, right? You know, boy, was I wrong, you know. but I am truly grateful for that, you know, for the education. Even in like Miss Pauline would just shared her remarkable story, right? You know, and I'm just grateful to be considered a friend of hers today, you know, and being introduced to different people. Like I got Lanon back there. She helped me help start these study group for students, you know, like being able to teach other people things that we've learned, you know, and I found out the benefits of that, being able to teach someone something that you've learned, you actually get to learn it twice, you know, and these type of things that are, you know, because I've always been more of an introvert, even like right now I'm standing up here, I'm nervous, like, you know, and, you know, like coming in the process, you know, with low self-esteem, low self-worth, those type of things, and being caught up in drug addiction for over 45 years of my life. You know, and actually changed my life 7 years ago. This is my 7th year in recovery, right? Thank you, and only by the grace of God I stand before you here today. You know, even though in my struggles, I contracted the HIV virus. This is my 26th year of living with it, but 19 of those years I was dying with it. But today I say I live with it because I've been undetected for the last 5-6 years, right? Due to me changing my life, you know. And, I mean, these things just, I mean, like, Literacy Action, like, just, there's a program that not only seek, you know, seek you toward, you know, prep you for your GED, help, you know, reshape your mind, have reshaped this mind anyway, you know. and I'm grateful for that as well, you know, and just give me a whole different perspective on life. You know, and even with the math, with all the different forms of math, you know, and when I left school in 1974, they were just bringing algebra and fraction into the Atlanta school system. And I got very little of it because I didn't think I will be able to learn it. But today, I'm able to teach other people the different forms of math, you know, and help my grandchildren. You know, I'm going to be a grandfather, leave my great nieces rather, you know. But this will be my first grandchild, but it's just a whole lot of things. It's just this building of confidence within oneself. You know, and I'm telling you, I deal with a lot of low self-esteem. But I wrote a few things about what I like about Literacy Action. I pretty much done summed them all up, you know. But you know, but I just wanted to just be a little brief, you know, just reading things like I was talking about the fact that how I started with the Literacy Action program in the adult literacy program. And you know, like they considered it a program, but I considered it a school. Like I was saying earlier about making an apology to myself. This was one of the things that I promised myself that I would go back to school. You know, at the age of 60 years old, I decided to try to look for a GED program, and I found one downtown Atlanta, and then they eventually closed after, you know, I turned 61. I went there about a year. Then at the age of 62, I was at one of these, you know, a part of the NA Fellowship. Please don't hold it against me. But that someone told me about Literacy Action downtown, and so I went, and they prepped me for it and accepted me, and I've been there for, you know, the last few years, and have made a lot of progress since I've been there. You know, like learning different things. You know, just like having the willingness to come and stand before you all, right? You know, it take a lot of courage for me to do that. You know, because I'm always have been yes, and being like more of an introvert. You're like standing in the background. You like even with the hearing, I mean, I love all the support that we, you know, that our backers, you know, supports about, you know, like I was looking at the monitor when they were showing. I didn't know they had captured me on the screen, right? You know, sitting at one of the tables, you know, because I was just hard at work. It was one of these young ladies. She's from Liberia. She was the one that taught me how to reduce fractions, right? And then I'm able to teach others, like I said before. But now that she's quit school and able to start these new support groups and just keeping me going and man, just going on and on. And another thing, they teach us at Literacy Action. They give us these free computer classes. You know, and like 4 or 5 years ago, I was afraid to turn one on. They didn't even know how to do it. But now I'm hosting Zoom meetings, right? You know, these and it was just like even learning about a cell phone, right? I come in this process with a flip phone, you know. and to have a touch screen, I didn't think I would ever grasp that concept. No, but just like, even though like it was just a few things that someone had said to me about like some of the richest wealth, one of the richest wealth is wisdom. And one of the strongest weapon is patience. And the best security is faith. And our greatest tonic is laughter. You know, these are things that I have to implement on a daily basis. You know, even though, of course, I'm not perfect. If I say that, I'll be standing and telling you a lie, right? You know, but the journey continues. You know, just a day at a time, minute at a time, or whatever at a time. And I'm just so grateful to be a part of Literacy Action. And the journey continues. And thank you all for listening.
Milton, what a great way to bring this home today. And so I am here to thank everybody in the room, but really, Milton, we want to thank you, Pauline, Lena, thank you for trusting Literacy Action to help you reach your dreams. Use those beautiful words. It goes for all three of you. So thank you for trusting Literacy Action. I also want to thank those instructors that made differences in your lives. I want to thank the staff at Literacy Action and those instructors who sit with you every day, every time you come in. We congratulate you all, we thank you, and we applaud you. So, a couple quick statements. You've heard this morning from K through 12. You've heard from post-secondary, workforce development, corporate, philanthropy, economic institution. You've heard the full life cycle of what our journey we say for regarding education. And I use the word cycle. We're here amongst circles underneath us because we are all on a team to make a difference. We're also using the word cycle because we use the word cycle of poverty. And that's a cycle that we want to break or you wouldn't be in this room. There is no one organization that does it best. It is a circle of partners. It's people in this room like you. It's people who are outside those doors that are just miles away from the ground zero here in Atlanta. So we are better together. And I challenge you and I thank you all for being part of that Better Together team. I do want to tell one quick story before he walks out. My good friend Frank Brown, who is CEO of Communities in Schools. And what I love about Frank, if you don't know him, everybody who he goes through his program are his babies. It doesn't matter how old you are, he calls them my babies. He's got one baby who's going to be a couple weeks away from over here at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. For you Georgia fans, Devon Wyatt is a local Atlanta celebrity. He is at UGA right now. He is a phenomenal defensive player and has come through the Communities in Schools program. The reason I bring him up is he is one of those kids who has gotten through. He is going to succeed. He is going to get out, but he's doing it on his athletic ability, which is great, but not every kid has that opportunity. Frank will tell you, many of you believe you understand the story that Communities in Schools did with him at his school in Decatur, and you think it stopped there. What you don't know is that Communities in Schools followed him to junior college, not college, junior college, where they helped fund his dorm, they helped fund all of his essentials, they helped fund him meet all of his daily needs. When he transferred to Georgia, Communities in School paid for that transcript, not University of Georgia. When he got to University of Georgia, Communities in Schools helped with all of his living essentials till he could get to where he is today. The reason I tell you that story goes back to what Bentina said. And I don't know if this is Devontae's story. I'm not sure. I don't know what his life was like in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. But I can tell you, and what Bentina said, is that for a child that's living in a house where the parents, the guardians, the adults are at a 5th grade reading level or below, that is what we call low literate, there is and I'll say it, Bentina said it, a 72% chance that that child is going to read at that level of that adult or below, at that level or less than. So I don't know if that's Devontae's story, but there are more kids than that that went through his system that he's been following all along. So look, if you could go back to that point in time and you could be in a family where the adults are literate, the adults are the teachers, the adults are that income producer, the adults are those community contributors. So I challenge you all in this room to think about that. And if we really want to have an impact on breaking that cycle of poverty, it's not the only way, but dealing with adult literacy is a big way to break that cycle. So I ask you, Dr. Karstarf and Maria said it, I ask you, help keep Literacy Action at the table. Help be part of the team. Help that team continue to go. And actually, I think it's okay to challenge the team to do more. You can do more. Literacy Action can do more and wants to do more, but they need to do it with your support. So there are ways to give, and here there's an envelope for you old schoolers. There's also a website for you, middle schoolers, and then for those of you who can do it really well, you can use your phone right there. So I ask you in this season of thanks, of giving thanks, please consider a Literacy Action. Please give, please support. I want to thank our panel. You all did an incredible job. I want to thank our moderator, our leadership, all instructors, all our students. Thank you for being here. We'll let you go now. Enjoy your holidays. Happy Thanksgiving. Be safe, and thank you for being here today.